I preached for 60 years. In all of that time, I don't think I borrowed a sermon. I don't think I preached another man's sermon but 2 times. Now, I have some colleagues, and I mean some very capable, accomplished, and productive colleagues in ministry who never get up a sermon. They always preach somebody else's, partly because the churches they serve have dumped so many duties upon them that they really know they don't have time to do the serious prep and study that it takes to get up a good sermon, and so they steal one from somebody that did get up a good one, and sometimes they give credit, but a whole lot of the time they don't, and that's all right, but that just did not work for me. So using somebody else's material never really been a comfortable setting for me as a preacher. Well, I got word Friday night that I might be needing to stand in this pulpit today. My usual prep time for a sermon was 8 weeks. I always had about a half a dozen, if not more, a dozen ideas working at some stage, waiting for some inspiration, waiting for me to read something, see something, hear something, whatever would happen to get me thinking, okay, I can talk about that. But it took me a couple of months to get a sermon together. This time I had 24 hours, little plus. That doesn't work. I tell you that to explain to you, I am borrowing a sermon this morning that I did not write one single word of. I've stolen this sermon totally because that guy who got it up has had 94 years to get ready to write a sermon this good. He's doing a good job too. I have stolen a sermon from Joe Barnett. Now, there are very few of you here with enough gray hair or no hair to know Joe Barnett. Let me explain before I share his sermon with you. When I moved here in 1968, invited by this church to come back and be your preacher, Joe Barnett was senior minister at Central Church of Christ here in Amarillo, at that time the largest Church of Christ in the Texas Panhandle. Joe was here just a few months before the Broadway church down in Lubbock enticed him away, hired him, and he went down there and was their preacher for a couple of decades. During that period of time, I was often into Lubbock holding revival-type meetings with various churches down there in that part of the world, and we crossed trails just a little bit, but I don't know that Joe knew if I existed, and I certainly didn't have an entree into his life. So those decades, I listened to his stuff, and I saw what he was writing, and I thought, wow, this guy's good. But we didn't have a friendship going. I couldn't detail all of what took place. I shouldn't, you don't want me to take time. But it worked out eventually where that Joe became a very dear friend of mine. In fact, you should know that every day Joe Barnett opens our church bulletin that he now gets online and prays by name for every person on the sick list in our church bulletin. If I happen to call him and talk to him about something, he asks me how one of you are doing with whatever problem got mentioned in the bulletin. So he's almost become our absentee pastor. He loves us, he cares for us, so maybe it's appropriate that I'm stealing his stuff and sharing it with you. But the time came when Joe decided he is a superb writer, and he decided it made more sense for him to write and publish and do that kind of thing than to preach from a pulpit and do all the trivial stuff that often preachers get required to do. And so Joe resigned from the church there at Broadway and became the full-time publication owner, manager, writer for Pathways Evangelism, and he's done that all of his years. Now, it was in that stage that some way, and I don't remember all the details of how this worked out, my little brother Curtis, who helps me edit the Christian Appeal, my little brother Curtis and I wound up meeting Joe Barnett one day a week at his office publication office, not church office, down in Lubbock, and we together, the three of us, wrote a book that never got published because the publisher had the indignity and atrocity to die on us the month that we finished the writing. But that was a heavenly year because during that year, Joe and I bonded to the point that we'll be bonded when we get to heaven. Such a special, special person. Now, I tell you all of that to suggest to you that several months ago, I copied out of one of his blogs on the Pathway Evangelism thing, I copied a deal that he had done there, which is a short sermon. And I said, one of these days, if I get caught in a bind and I really need something in a great big hurry, this is good. This I can share. And it's been lying there on my desk for several months. And then I got the call Friday night. So here I am about to read to you a sermon that I did not write. So I'm trying to be honest with you. He entitled this, An Inside Job. Think about that title. We use that usually to mean something dishonest. He's not. Joe said when they pass out medals for bravery, Sherry Basu deserves one. This 4 feet 1 inch, 24-year-old was 65 pounds of raw courage. He says, I met Sherry a few years ago when she was managing a one-day dry cleaner and laundry located in my neighborhood adjoining a convenience store where I bought my morning paper and my coffee. He said, I began timing my trip to arrive when Sherry did so that I could carry her purse and the plastic bag that contained her lunch, and then he explains why. Sherry had a congenital deformity that had her trapped in a twisted body with legs that wouldn't work. Negotiating the 5 yards from her car to the front door of the store was an ordeal. Holding onto a railing, she would take a short, faltering step with her left foot, drag the right one alongside, rest, and then repeat the routine. Nothing in that shop was user-friendly for someone in her size or in her condition. The 4 steps from the customer service counter to the garment conveyor carousel was a slow, torturing trip for her. Joe said I would find it tough to live with her handicap for one day. She had lived with it every day of her life. Sherry, he wrote, would have been a shoo-in for disability benefits, but instead, she showed up for work 6 days a week and tackled a 12-hour shift, 7 to 7. He said, I asked her what time she had to get up to get ready for work. She said, 3:30. Never and always described Sherry. She never complained. She always smiled. Be strong and courageous, God said to Joshua, but he didn't need to say that to Sherry. After that illustration, Joe got a little more serious about not Sherry, but about us. Courage, he said, has many faces. It is the single mom struggling to make ends meet an hour stretch. It is the laid-off father feeling the agony of hopelessness but refusing to give up. It is the child of divorce suffering the ache of rejection and battered self-image but still hanging in there. It is the caregiver contending with exhaustion but remaining compassionate and careful. It is the chemo patient battling terror and fatigue who jokes that bald really is beautiful. It is the widow facing old age alone, but facing the world with a smile. And it is the person whose heartache is played out in the shadows unknown to others. Your youthful dreams envisioned a lived happily ever after adventure, but life may instead have taken a cruel turn and dumped you at a very different destination. Life is a mixture of joy and sorrow. We all know that, of course. Joe said you have good days and bad days, victories and defeats, times when you feel good and times when you don't. What sets courageous people apart is that they refuse to give up. They stumble, fall, and get up and move on. The strongest are not those who win, but those who don't quit when they lose. Marianne Rodmacher wrote, "Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, 'I'll try again tomorrow.'" Then Joe said, my friend Alan Isbell, also my friend, says that it is easier to control your actions than your attitudes. Bad attitudes, he says, are toxic. And Alan went on to say they poison from inside out. They contaminate relationships. They sabotage happiness. They make life miserable. Alan said, reach deep within yourself and summon the courage to accept ownership of your attitude. Stop blaming others for your actions and moods, for your flaws and failures. Someone hurt your feelings, broke your heart, shattered your dreams. Let it go. Move on, forgive. However badly someone has treated you and however deeply it hurts, get over it. And then Alan said, "That's not easy, Joe." And Joe replied, "I know." "Well, do it anyway," Joe wrote, "for your own sake. For until you do, you will spend your days wallowing in the muck of misery and self-pity. So decide now, this moment, to give up the blame game. Your circumstances may be beyond your control, but your attitude isn't. Courage to change your attitude, here's the title, Courage to change your attitude is an inside job. Well, I turned on my computer screen, opened my Bible program that I use to hunt scriptures, and was surprised, frankly, as I searched for that one scripture that Joe used here where Moses says to Joshua and God says to both of them, you be strong and you be of good courage. And I did a little searching and I was amazed to find that that commandment, is that what that is? Advice, I don't know what you want to call it. That instruction, be strong and of good courage, shows up over 24 times in your Bible. I've been reading Bible 80-something years. I didn't know that. And everybody, it seemed like, that mattered either heard that or said it. Not only Moses to Joshua and Joshua to his people, but David to Solomon right when David was about to die, and Solomon to his people when he's about to be done with being a king. And then Isaiah says it to his people, and Jeremiah says it to his people, and then Jesus says it to his men. And then, would you be surprised? No, that the apostles kept telling it to the church, and you read it 3 or 4 times in the writings of John and Paul. Peter, telling us to be strong and to be, some versions say, of good courage. I like the version that says, and be brave. Well, it takes that to get through life, doesn't it? Right now, today, can you imagine what kind of bravery, courage it's taking Lyndon and his family to face what's happening in their life? Not easy. Lots of us in the church here have let those of you who are widows just show up by yourself, alone, Sunday after Sunday, some of you for a decade plus now, without realizing that, yes, we love to see you here, and yes, you're part of us, and we count you to be a friend, but somehow we don't process what you're going through, living by yourself, living without the mate you had, living where you have responsibilities you never had before. Be strong and of good courage. That's the kind of thing he's talking about. Well, I won't enlarge on Joe's sermon. I hope you realize that it has a whole lot more to say than most of us preachers do when we stand up and talk. And guess what? It's only a third as long.